Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Pamela Roth live show. Today is June 6th, 2022. This is the first show, our first segment of the new show, and I'm kicking it off with a dear friend of mine, the Honorable Nader J, Sayegh, who is a politician, an attorney, an educator from the state of New York, and he's also New York State Assemblyman representing the 90th District of the New York State Assembly based in Yonkers since 2019. Good evening, Nader, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Pam. It's my pleasure to be on the show, especially to kick off a show. To me, it's a real pleasure. Not only are you a friend, but anyone that really undertakes the important role of communicating and making the public more aware generally promotes understanding, promotes knowledge, promotes advocacy. And that's what you do through your show and other means that really enable public officials and others at every level of government to really have an opportunity to speak out, explain, and really gain knowledge from the show and really find out what the issues and concerns. Because as a state assemblyman, that's the legislative body in New York that is considered the people's house. That's where legislation starts. So anytime somebody has a recommendation, has an idea to change educational policy or healthcare or any other policy, it usually comes out of communications like we're doing now, where somebody goes to your assemblyman, I have a good recommendation, or why can't we do something a different way or a better way? And that's how we sponsor legislation. When the assembly approves it, it also gets approved to the next level by the New York State Senate, and then the governor signs off. And that's how policy is set in New York State. So I'm glad because this is an opportunity for me to expand information and gain information. So thank you, Em.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate you joining us because I know you just came back from Albany, and there's been so much happening in Albany over the last week with Governor Hochul. And well, as you know, the topic for tonight is the safety of our school system in light of the horrific tragedy that took place in Uvalde, Texas. And that was one of the reasons why I brought you on to discuss that, because of your background with the school system in Yonkers and in the state of New York, but also because of your position as a New York State Assemblyman. As you said, people need to speak to the people in power and know what changes can be made, because so many people feel helpless and they don't know how to get the messages across, and they don't know how to speak to their politicians and elected officials.
Well, you're right. The politics takes shape at every level. And I often tell individuals, you have a local issue, you go to your city council, your village council, that's local government. And then you have a branch of county government, and people under county government have different methods or services that are available. And then you get to the state level where I am, where New York State sets policy that's statewide. So whatever we set policy is New York. But then our issue also is on the federal level, where we may have legislative pieces we pass, but then if federal law is different, then we have the problem where other states have different laws, especially with gun safety. Gun safety has become, as you said earlier, Pam, a major issue. There's a level of frustration in America all across our country that one incident after the other, and those of us that hear of the days of Parkland, and we hear of Uvalde and Buffalo and even Sandy Hook. I mean, we look back, and these issues and these shootings, you're talking about a decade and more, and years later, we're still experiencing the same trauma impacting school kids, especially me as a school principal for many years. For me, I envision the horror of when the media speaks about a shooting and students and staff being in a classroom and barricaded, and a gunman there shooting young children and others. It's really traumatic. It's hurtful, and it really incites us as legislators to say, well, even if the federal government doesn't move in a timely fashion, what could we do as New York legislators to try to do whatever we can to fix? And as you said, this legislative session that recently completed, believe it or not, we had almost a 24-hour session from Friday morning till Saturday morning, right? This is straight session where our legislative body passed 10 pieces of legislation dealing with gun violence. And it's our way of saying, you know what? Even though the federal government should react and should pass gun safety legislation, we need to do our share. And our share, in my opinion, was one of the strongest gun policy legislative moves in the entire nation. And it took place in New York State. Maybe from our experience with Buffalo and other shootings that took place, we recognize that it's not only schools, it could be a hospital. If somebody is upset with, abortion, upset with other medical care, it could be in a shopping center. What that tells me is that we, unfortunately, in our nation, because of polarization and division, we have such a unfounded level of hatred that has polarized us as a people because of politics. In the old days of politics, two political parties have disagreements, they have elections. Once you get elected, you represent everyone.
Right.
But unfortunately, that division is so deep and the anger is so much that hatred has overcome. So we got to legislate and educate and make people aware and set policy and legislation that really makes us safer.
And right now, there's an expression. I'm sorry, I woke up today with a horrible sinus attack. There's an expression that I learned years ago from former New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik when he was talking about all the domestic terrorism, and he spoke of the phrase soft targets. And all of these places that have been shot up with these mass shootings are considered soft targets because you think of a school, you bring your children to school, they're safe. And this is, where they are from, like, say, kindergarten through 12th grade. They're only supposed to know of, that childhood innocence, going to school, playing, creating, having fun. And they're supposed to be insulated from everything that we have to face as adults in so-called the grown-up real world. And that has all been shattered. And when you have all these school shootings, the trauma is going to be with them forever. I don't see that it's going to get better over time because you've really shattered their innocence. When you hear of a 4th grade girl who came forward the other day that she had to cover herself in the blood of a classmate to pretend that she was dead, how do you ever get past that?
It's lifelong trauma, and parents send their kids to school, for example, and you expect them to be safe,
Exactly.
and when that takes place, we had issues where there was fear. Parents didn't want to send their kids to school. They weren't sure whether when is the next shooting taking place, and you have copycats, and you have individuals that think it's a honorable thing that I want exposure. That's why some of the legislative policy focused on social media and how we portray these individuals that go and shoot. And the last two incidents, 18-year-olds that had, whether legal or illegal guns, took these guns and shot up people and so forth. The legislative policy, and some people will say, well, anytime you set policy, it has a negative impact on another group. And that's truthful. When you deal with gun legislation, problem we have as legislators nationally and locally, you have the perception or the belief by many Americans that, hey, I'm a law-abiding citizen,
Yes.
and I want to protect my family, and why are you legislating to make it difficult for me that has an illegal gun that I purchased and applied for to protect my family. The constitutional amendments and rights provide us that opportunity. Why are you taking it away when the real issue is criminals that have illegal guns, and therefore, you're targeted the wrong group? And the other side is anytime you can take more guns out of the streets, and anytime you can take away the opportunity, whether somebody has mental illness or has hatred or other motives, take guns out of the hands, then that's common sense gun policy. And you have Moms Demand Action. You have so many groups that lost loved ones as a result of shootings, and they're very organized, and they've done a very good job, in my opinion, reaching out public officials, to myself, to levels of government, all levels of government, to really stress the importance of gun support and safety legislation. And that's where we are right now. We're passing legislation. We have opposition to it. But in my opinion, 2/3 of Americans, when I look at surveys, want gun legislation. They want safety. They want to get guns off the street. And that is more important than worrying about, allowing people to have multiple guns. And the reason I'm saying this, and I tell my friends that lobby with me about, hey, I want to have a legitimate gun. And I'll say, you know what? The way the law is, yes, if you have a gun license or permit, you're allowed to have a gun. But are you allowed to have a semi-automatic weapon? Are you allowed to have something that shoots 50, 100 rounds? I mean, who would need that? Unless you're military or police, do you need to have a vest? Can you allow an 18-year-old to go buy a body vest? Somebody who's not police or military, or someone who has a security or safety or law enforcement role to play, then fine. I'm all for that. And I think most of us as Americans say, yeah, we want to make sure that there's a process that secures the legal purchase of weapons and guns. So, and it goes further, Pam. I mean, we just passed ghost gun legislation. You realize that there's companies out there that are making these ghost guns where you look at pieces that they make. It's not a weapon on its own, right, but knowingly you put them together and it becomes a gun. It becomes a weapon.
But it's crazy because they're not detectable.
That's right.
You cannot detect them. If you go through with the metal detector, it's not going to pick it up because it's made out of plastic.
And now there's legislation that holds gun manufacturers liable. That was never a plan. There was immunity there. As a lawyer, a lot of groups out there, because of immunity, felt, oh, I have a shield, so I can do what I want and I'm safeguarded. Slowly, these are backing away. These are taking those protective devices that gun manufacturers had for years, and not only in New York, across the country. And people say, well, we're America, we're a democratic society, we're safe here. The sad part, when you look at the data, we're one of the most unsafe societies. For our population, we have more guns and more crimes, believe it or not, than most countries in the world. I think all countries in the world, other than military intervention or problems or civil strife problems these countries may have, when it comes to the normal street gun violence, we're probably number one with that. And shame on us, so we got to do a better job.
And it's every day that you hear about it. Just today, I heard that there was a gun battle on the Upper East Side in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And there's no fear anymore of, if you're having a gun battle in the middle of the street, they're not concerned about bystanders and children and having parks and schools and playgrounds nearby. It's just a free-for-all.
Yeah. In Yonkers, a couple of years ago, we had an issue, on one of the streets in Yonkers, and somebody shooting between rival gangs, which hopefully, we put an end to. We took a strong stand, our law enforcement, police department, working closely with the community. We set up community councils. We put investment in training, in de-escalation skills and strategies. And sure enough, crime in Yonkers has gone down tremendously. So when people say it's hopeless, I disagree. As someone that has experienced firsthand whether safety in schools or safety in the way law enforcement functions, or how you promote community input and participation and collaboration, I really believe that there is best practices. There is best practices that at every level we can apply that work really well in certain schools, certain communities and states, because of legislation and procedures and policy, that when we incorporate and put forth, then it can have a positive atmosphere and a positive outcome. And, to that point, as I said, in a city like Yonkers, where a decade ago we had issues as far as crime, today Yonkers is one of the safest urban cities in the state, and probably one of the top 10 in the nation. And when you talk to law enforcement officials, and I do talk to them, because whether it's bail reform, whether it's other strategies, and there's conflict both ways, I like to get to the source. It's our legal training, it's my educational training. I like to get every perception. I like to get every opinion, and then I look at best practices, and that works. Best practices when it comes to getting guns off the street, in my opinion, involves legislation like we did in New York, and some has been around for a while, even dating back to Ronald Reagan. People don't realize back then, when Reagan, there was that assassination attempt on Reagan, and then they had the Brady Bill. The Brady Bill was basically a bill that the government at the time, the federal government, said, you know what? We got to have background checks on anyone purchasing a weapon. People say, well, that's my right to purchase a weapon. Yeah, but you know what? If you have mental illness, or you have a history of incitement on social media and talking about hate, then you know what? You shouldn't have a gun. If you have a history of domestic violence, or you have spousal abuse or children abuse, then you know what? There should be a high risk for you to get a gun. And judges should have the discretion of saying this person shouldn't have a pistol or a rifle, or especially a semi-automatic. And,
right. And you talk about semi-automatic weapons, like the ones that have been used in a lot of these mass shootings. What is it, the AR-15?
yeah,
These assault rifles.
yeah, that's
Everyone wants to talk, right. Everyone wants to talk about, like, yes, you have the Second Amendment right to bear arms. But back in the days, if you want to look at the real language of the Constitution, back then it was a musket.
Yeah.
There was no AR-15 back then. It was a musket.
But even a lot of my colleagues that represented communities upstate, for example, one of the bills we passed. By the way, we passed 10 bills
this past week.
This session, we passed 10 legislative bills, and we'll go over them just for the audience to know some of the things that we feel, can help us, the bottom line, get guns off the street. So,
well, these bills, because I was doing some research before bringing you on, Governor Hochul signed bills this week aimed at strengthening the New York gun laws. Yeah. And also, if I'm not mistaken, also to protect schools.
Well, school protection, for me is crucial. Mm-hmm. I was a school principal in addition to being an attorney for some 30 years. And in an urban school district in Yonkers, not only did I promote high test scores and increase morale in schools and motivated parents and students to feel a sense of pride and increase their self-esteem, we went a step further. Because as a legislator, I've lobbied hard, not only for educational funding, but lobbied hard for support service funding to make sure that we can address the mental illnesses and emotional and physical disabilities and other concerns. What we realized when people are homeless or people are committing crimes or drug addiction or other concerns in society, most of the time when you look at the core is problems these individuals had when they were young and when they were school age. And what has happened, which is really a society concern in my opinion, is there was a lack of adequate services. As a
Correct.
principal, we know that when schools get their funding, if there's a lack of adequate funding, and it happens year after year, unfortunately, you're mandated as a school district, and I served as a board president, so I know the policy procedures of the legislation of school education. From that perspective, if classroom instruction was mandated, what was not? Support services were not, so you had cuts over there. Music classes were canceled, art.
After school programs to keep them off the street.
And then you look at a situation, let's say in an urban high school, because of cuts, where you have, let's say, 1,200 kids that have one social worker or one school psychologist or one guidance counselor. For kids that have these disabilities or these emotional issues, how can one social worker or psychologist handle sometimes 1,200 and more? How can you give that one-to-one need? You can't.
You can't.
So this educational process or this funding, we provided a major increase of funding to urban education, to mental illness, to getting guns off the street, programs that, in my opinion, address the core needs of students at a very early stage. And I know that when you give these children those skills and you get them to graduate high school and get them to go on their way to college, they're more inclined to do well, to seek a career and stay out of trouble. And when you don't address their problems, then you get the other problems of dealing with the correctional system, crime, and these young people going to jail. And society, in my opinion, has to pay a lot more because of the homelessness and the crime and the drug addiction than if they invested those funds early on.
Right, at a younger age. But if you remember too, back in the days from, let's say, 30 years ago and longer, schools had taught actual skills. You had home economics, you had workshop, you had actual skills that kids learned that, maybe at the time we mocked it, like, oh, who wants to do something like that? But if you think about it, those skills are not being taught to kids now. Boys are graduating from high school. They don't even know how to make a tie on a button-down shirt. And it could be the fact that there's no father figure in the home. So they're not even learning something to that effect. They're not learning how to go out. Then when they have to get a job, like one-on-one skills, how to even interview, because they are so focused on tweets and short characters and texting, and they're not prepared for the real world. And personally, I think programs should be brought back into schools to teach kids life skills. Kids are growing up now. They're getting out of school. They don't even know how to open up a bank account.
That's so true.
And it's sad because, I've spoken to a lot of these kids and I asked them if they know how to open up a bank account. And they look at me like, we don't need a bank account. What do you mean you don't need a bank? Of course you do. But something, I think they're embarrassed to say that they don't know how to open one. So they'd rather just pass it off saying, oh, we don't need one.
You're right. Well, civic awareness, something as a board president and as a principal initiated many years ago with career development programs, finding job experiences, got federal funding where we gave students stipends to work in their senior year in high school. We initiated programs in high school where many of our students now get nearly almost a year, in many cases a year of college out of their way, because we know for a child to do the normal coursework, what happens in their senior year, 12th grade? All I need is a few credits, right. And then they don't focus on instruction. So now that senior year, and sometimes even the 11th grade, they're taking college credits where we make arrangements with local colleges They're very cost effective. We get grants to pay for it. So many of our kids go to college and they finish a 4-year program in 3 years. In 3 years because they completed a year in high school. That keeps them highly motivated, productive. As to your point, we initiated a lot more life skills program so that they can learn how to put a resume together, how to pay insurance, how to get a driver's license, if they have an immigration problem, how to apply for citizenship and really get on the right track. These are skills that weren't available. Now we even passed legislation where you don't have to wait till you're 18 years old to vote. Now in your 17th year, in your senior year in high school, you can register, pre-register. So when you go to college, you go elsewhere, not only are you registered to vote, you're given skills about civic responsibility. And now, if you follow the election turnout the last number of years, the highest number of young people that are speaking up, that are having a voice, and I love that. And I say, hey, you're the future generation.
Exactly.
You got to speak up. You got to tell us what your needs. And they're coming to us. I got so many conferences with young people on clean energy, on environment, and they're telling us, saying, you old timers are killing our world, for our generation. We want you to pass legislation to get rid of fossil fuel and to promote a more, green society and clean energy. Now they just passed legislation where all state buses got to be electric. The counties are doing that now. People, it's amazing how even 10 years ago, the thought of transition into clean energy and electric cars and emission control was something that was far-fetched, but it's happening. Last year we passed legislation to get rid of plastic bags, where years ago people went shopping and you wouldn't think about, oh, how can I go shopping, and you'll get rid of plastic bags.
Exactly.
You learn about tons of plastic in the ocean and how the pollution and how the environment, and you look at climate control and climate change. That's where young people are saying, hey, our ozone level is being destroyed. Our Earth, Mother Nature, you're destroying it. Save it for us, for our generation.
Right. The polar ice cap is melting.
Yeah.
For the longest time, it was mentioned and everybody poo-pooed it, saying like, oh, listen, the Earth takes care of itself. Sure, the Earth will take care of itself when we're all wiped out, and then it'll start all over again.
Yeah. Earth is saying, hey, work with me a little bit, don't abuse me. And we know whenever there's abuse in anything in life, it's not a good thing. So these type of legislations are crucial, but my opinion is, even though we're looking at gun legislation because we're realizing that's an out of control problem, we got to look further. We can't just be reactionaries. That's a problem in our government and society. We wait for panic to occur. We try to deal with it. I'm looking at school safety. I'm reaching out to Board of Ed presidents in my region, to trustees, to superintendents, and saying, hey, let's look at what has been a best practice, when it comes to school safety. And as a principal, I develop extensive programs, and even as a board president, initiated in a school district like Yonkers, where we encourage greater school law enforcement communications.
Like a ratio.
For example, now we have security cameras in our high schools and school buildings. We have a system set up where those security cameras and communication devices are open between school officials and local police. So God forbid, if there's an issue that needs immediate law enforcement involvement, it's within seconds that setup is set up. You have a buzzard system, for example, that promotes an emergency status immediately. You have a new mechanism that allows security to be, for example, in one major entrance for anybody who wants to come into a school building, comes through that main entrance. But that doesn't, for example, stop people from leaving the building, because we know from experience, you can't say, like some people are saying, well, close every door, barricade them, and have only one. That's even more dangerous. God forbid you have trauma, you have a fire, you have an emergency. You want people to be able to exit the building safely. But having said that, I knew that sometimes, whether it's a gym door or some back door of the school, where staff members may leave it open, or please put a piece of something to keep it open.
Yes, the door propped open.
So fellow staff members can come and go and get their lunch and go to their car.
Run out, have a cigarette, come back in.
Exactly. I mean, that's dangerous. So I witnessed that years ago, and I made a point of stressing how urgent safety was, and making sure that, there was reprimand if anybody was caught, and there should be security cameras at all entrances. That's part of the solution we're recommending. So that, and there should be a regular checkup, because sometimes these handbars on doors get locked, or they get loose, for example, or hinges get damaged, where anybody with a credit card or any instrument can open a door. So that's not safety. So you want to make sure you have cameras at every entrance and every exit area, so people know, look, we're watching. Secondly, you want to make sure there's regular checkups of every door in the building, to make sure on a regular basis that when they're intended to lock, they lock, that you can only leave, but you can't come in. And I myself used to go to outside doors and say, let me see if I can get in. Right. If I can get in and I can, wiggle the door and get it open, I called maintenance. I called security. I said, we got a problem here. If I can get in, somebody else can get in. Too. So things like that are crucial. Professional development, staff training becomes important, so that, if there's an alarm on the loudspeaker, there's a problem in the school, teachers know there's certain codes, that's in different schools are different, where, teachers are told, lock up your doors and have the kids go into the back closet and so forth. These are things that years ago, if you remember the days of the air drills, they used to teach children to go under the desk, in case there's a bombing or whatever. Now it's more severe. Now we worry about somebody running into a school and shooting at children and kids.
Well, it's funny, because I grew up in Washington Heights, and in those old buildings, that's not there anymore. Those old buildings, as you drove by, some of them, they had a symbol on the outside of the building. It was like a yellow sign with like black, shit on it, that let you know that there was like some sort of a shelter in there in case of anything happening.
Oh yeah, but now we passed legislation that makes background checks part of the process. We passed legislation where now in New York State, where the age to purchase a semi-automatic was 18, now it's 21 years old, for example. And just to show you how far it goes, we in New York, even recently, this last, did a local state report now that's required for all seized or recovered guns. And that all goes to a shared database, what they call ATF, part of the Federal Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. This is something that was lacking. Problem is, we found out no matter what we did to try to get guns off the streets in New York, they were bringing the guns from Georgia, from Texas, from Carolinas, from Virginia. So now legislation that develops this common agenda, common database, local and state and out-of-state officials to communicate with each other as far as, the guns and the purchases and the data of who's bringing and buying guns. That all, in my opinion, lessens the amount of guns coming into New York. And then now they have a new policy we passed, micro stamping. so that every gun manufacturers have to put a microchip that, for example, is on every gun, so we know who the weapon belongs to, who made it, if it was purchased by who, when it was purchased, where it was purchased. Some people say, "Oh, that takes away confidentiality." Well, you know what? I'm all for individual protections and opportunity to speak up and constitutional rights, but then we as legislators, as a society, have to look at the needs of the general public. And when sometimes your individual rights are not as strong as society or general public, then we got to modify.
Right, but it has to be public safety versus the right to privacy.
Well, that's it. You as an attorney, we learned many years ago when we talk about the right to speak. We point to an example of a movie house when it was packed and it's dark, and a person goes, "Well, I have a right to speak up and voice and say what I want, so I can rise out in a dark, packed movie house and yell fire." You know what happens? You're gonna get a
stampede,
run out, stampede, and you're gonna have so many people. No, you don't have that right. So
right, you don't have the right to incite violence or to incite any sort of a riot.
Exactly. So that's where our role really is to say, you know what, things are getting out of order, school situation. But then, like we said last week, medical doctors were killed and people in the healthcare facility were killed, because somebody felt, "Oh, I didn't get the treatment, I'm still in pain." Imagine somebody whether had back surgery, "I'm still in pain." Well, sometimes surgery doesn't get away the pain, so you go around and that gives you grounds to go kill and shoot at a hospital, or in Buffalo, innocent people at a supermarket, or people in a church, to go to people praying in a mosque or a church or synagogue and start shooting at people.
Or how about and at the gay bar, the gay club down in Florida?
If somebody has a disagreement with somebody's preference, to go into the gay bar in Florida, I think that was Parkland, and to shoot at people and so forth, and it's sad because it's not one pattern, but but again, what's the source of that? You look at the last presidential race, and I've been involved with politics 40 years, and I've never seen the division and the polarization we have now, to the level where there's hate. Years ago, there was a difference of politics, and, we as a country, most of us believe in mainstream government, mainstream politics. What has happened in America is you've developed a situation where you lost the mainstream and you have, the extreme left and the extreme right in our society that are trying to drive the two major parties one way or the other. And that's why that extreme division is what's causing the polarization and, in my opinion, the level of hate and prejudice.
That's what's fueling it, the hate and the prejudice. It's almost like it's cool to be the bully now. That's what it comes down to.
Well, look at Buffalo. Buffalo, it was clear cut. It was somebody who was hateful of blacks, and the target was blacks.
Same thing with that white kid who went and shot up a black church down south.
Exactly.
On a Sunday.
Or even the hate crime against Asian Americans that's going on all across the nation.
It's still going on. And then right before that, if you remember, there was the knockout game that started in Brooklyn in the Orthodox area. They'd be walking up to very Orthodox men and knocking them out from the back of the head to the point where, they're falling to the ground.
It's terrible. Anti-Semitism, during crisis all over the world, people are targeted. Middle Easterners were targeted for a while, blamed for oil embargoes, and that level of hate, situation takes place in Afghanistan, and you may have maybe 20 different peoples in that region of the world, but everybody becomes blamed for what happens. And international affairs plays a role. You look at the war in the Ukraine. We got involved to some extent I was so saddened because tried hard to promote and initiate dialogue, rather than war. But unfortunately, when war, is initiated, then what do you do to try to push governments to back off and sit on the table and try, to promote a peaceful resolution? You look at Ukraine, it's gone out of order to the point where, Ukrainians have suffered. The suffering that has taken place really resulted in people like myself and others that promoted stop aggression legislation to really try to, initiate processes where big businesses don't invest in countries or societies that don't do the right thing. And the same should go place in our country. We should look at the gun lobbyists. We should look at the gun manufacturers. We should get them to work with us, not to put out devices like ghost guns and others that we know are weapons. And that's the sad part about it. I look at, even the media. The media historically, when somebody was a lunatic and went out and shot, we gave that person so much exposure. As you said earlier, a person that, was a loser, a person that had a poor self-esteem, and they never got recognition. And all of a sudden, this is a way I can become recognized. My name is all over CNN and all over Fox News and local media. And P.S., we as a society, the method we socialize social media is really, in my opinion, wrong. I think we're learning because of the last incidents. We didn't hear the names of the shooters. So in a way, I think it works in a positive way to say, you know what, we're not going to give you exposure. We're going to punish you if you're not already shot by law enforcement, but we're not going to make you a hero. Till this day, people that are mass killers are like in the history books, like they're heroes. Maybe that's what they wanted.
They're glorified. Honestly, Nader, they're glorified. I mean, look back at all the mass murderers. It's like you remember their names. You don't know the names of any of the victims unless you or your family or a friend was personally affected. For instance, look at Son of Sam, David Berkowitz. You remember his name. You don't remember anybody else. John Wayne Gacy or any of these other, the pedophile killers, Zodiac killer. You don't remember any names of the victims. All of the actual murders themselves have all been glorified and almost like idolized. And that's unfortunate because you have so many of these serial killers who go back and try to recreate these various murders because they look back at these people going like, oh, that was a great idea. Let me try doing it.
Even I spoke to some of the local judges. We were talking about, you try to talk to everyone, whether it's looking at bail reform or recent gun shootings. I talk to law enforcement, to judges, to people just in every capacity, and I try to pick their minds and from their experiences, what's happening, what's not happening, what do they feel. With bail reform, even though the intent of bail reform was good, because if two people have a minor crime, why should one person go to jail because they can't afford $200 and the other person is back at home or their job? So the concept of equity and fairness is a good concept. But when you get to a situation where there was no safeguards and there was repeat offenders and violent criminals that were going around, feeling, hey, I can go to court and the judge will let me right off and I can go commit the same crime over and over and over again. So we went to judges and judges said, hey, we want you to give us more discretion so that we can make sure we don't grant the bail waivers and reform to known criminals or repeat offenders or violent felons. And that made a lot of sense for me. That's why twice, this is the second time we've reformed bail reform. So when people say, well, we passed policy, it's a setback to pull back, nonsense. I've always said, if you pass policy, first of all, you should get everyone together on the table. When it came to bail reform, I don't think there was enough communication between the community, with the judicial branch, with the legal profession, with the law enforcement, with the prosecutors, with the advocates, to say, guys, what can we do to make this work? This is necessary. This is fair. The same with criminal justice. The same with, for example, orders of protection. How many times does someone who violently beats up a spouse or child protective gets involved, and do judges historically have the right to say, wait, let me go a step further. If this person is known to have violent tendencies, should we go a step further and find out whether he or she has a gun or rifle home or weapon? People say, well, that has nothing to do. Sure it does. How many times did we let these abusers go home, and because a person complained about them, I'm going to fix that person? And how many times there was a killing or murder that took place, and then we look back and say, wow, we should have known this person was violent, and we should have not only had an order of protection, maybe we should have did a search to find out this person has a weapon and to take it away. It doesn't mean that once you get a weapon that you're set free and nobody can take it away from you. There has to be recertification every X amount of years. There has to be renewal procedures and policy. And if circumstances change, then you know what? We should be able to take away a weapon from someone.
Can I tell you, you should take that one step further and to determine whether or not somebody has mental illness, because you never know what happens from, like, say, year one, when somebody buys a lawfully owned weapon, and maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road, something happens in his or her life. It could be a loss of a job, a death, illness, could be anything. Something that's going to totally disturb that person's mental abilities, and somebody should be tested to find out if this person still should have a weapon. Just because it's lawfully possessed and owned doesn't mean if they have mental illness, they should still keep it.
Oh, yeah. You know what? We took for granted somebody blurts out a negative statement. Oh, he was just angry. He didn't mean it. But now there's new legislation, part of what we passed in New York, that if you blurt out and you make statements that incite or state that you're going to kill or you're going to mass murder, that's a crime in itself. People said, well, if it's only words, it doesn't matter. But you know what? We are learning from all these killings that took place that people say, well, yeah, he or she, he in most cases, used to state or blurt out he was angry and was going to kill and hurt people. Shouldn't that be enough? That's where we have to be proactive. If you remember when people years ago were leaving bombs on buses and streets, and that was a big issue, we had no problems telling society, you're in a subway, you're in a bus, you see a package.
Say something.
Say something. If you see something, say something, And, we learned the power of media, the power of awareness, the power of education, even something as simple as, alcohol. Years ago, alcohol was prohibited. And then we decided, we're going to legalize it, but we're going to make you aware that if you're caught drinking and driving. So now you have people that have designated drivers. You have people that are more concerned about drinking and driving. You can lose your car. You can lose your license. You can lose your opportunity to go to work. It's going to cost you $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees. People are thinking twice. Oh, I better make sure I don't drive. I take an Uber. Times have changed. Even obesity and our campaign about sugar-free and making sure you enjoy sugarless product helped a lot, right? Years ago we ate wrong, and we started this whole evolution of how to eat well and how to stay healthy. And smoking, we did this whole campaign about how this is your lungs and look at what smoking causes and cancer and so forth. In my opinion, when I was a kid and in a small room, my parents had 20 people over, relatives and others, 17 out of the 20 were smoking right in the room, right? Today, if 1 or 2 out of the 17 or 20, they're going outside to smoke. So people say, well, the message doesn't matter, nonsense. I think when we put our mind to it and we begin to educate the public, for example, on the need to get the public more involved, make sure that we reject any form of extremism politically on every end, left or right, and really begin to develop back what I've been preaching as a legislator, mainstream government, mainstream legislation. Let's put the rhetoric aside, put the extremism aside, and really get our country back to where I think it needs to be, where it's mainstream America, determining legislation on gun policy, finding a compromise between constitutional rights, individual rights, and the rights of society, and the rights of the victims. Too often, we don't talk about the victims. When we talk about, even now, the talk about clean slate is a big debate in New York, where if somebody serves their time in jail, in the correctional system,
Right.
should be allowed to start their life again. And I'm all for that. I'm all for second chances. I believe people, deserve a second chance. But then you got to look at the history. You got to look at the type of crime that was committed.
Correct.
You got to think of the victims. We too often we put the victims aside, and that's not fair.
Yeah, but at the same time, Nader, that's when the victims are allowed to make a victim impact statement, of course, as you know, at the time of sentencing. But they should also have that opportunity at parole hearings, which I believe they do. They're allowed to submit a letter at a parole hearing, whether or not this person should be allowed to be paroled or pass it until another time.
But now we're looking, society or the advocates are looking for practically getting rid of paroles and setting a system in place where, anybody that reaches a certain age, shouldn't stay in jail. But what if the person committed the crime at 58 years old and is given a 20-year sentence? Should he or she be out at 70 automatically? Or should he and she? I'm all for, if you serve your time and you've had good behavior, then we're passing legislation, which I think is necessary, where if you're stated to leave jail within a certain time, we as a system, should make sure that you have a GED. We should make sure you have training. We should make sure something as simple as having ID. You know how many prisoners leave sometimes after many years? They don't even have ID. They can't even go get a job. They can't even go to school because they haven't had any counseling or preparation. It's like somebody who's homeless, and we all deal with people. It's a big problem in our urban settings, sometimes homeless individuals. And the answer generally, well, if we find a housing for that homeless person, that takes care of their problem. And I say absolutely not. Again, I put on my educational cap on, again, what we opened the show with, how the lack of support services and counseling and psychiatric and psychological, the impact of that is still on that homeless person. 9 out of 10 times, that homeless person became homeless because of lack of job skills, a lack of education, a lack of a degree, a lack of, if they have a drug addiction problem or other concerns or criminal problems, then unless you address those problems and really help that person, not only put them in a facility where they have a room or a home, but you know what? Part of helping you find an apartment or a place to live, you must also join or be involved with support services units or services we have available. So that if we provide you with housing, we're looking now to a ton of funding that we provided recently to many agencies to say, you know what, tie in homelessness to affordable housing, tie it to support mental illness programs. This way, the person who had issues that brought him or her to homelessness are addressed. And then earlier you spoke about high school.
Yes.
And the kids that are fatherless, don't have positive images. We started, and it's now a national program, My Brother's Keeper. a terrific program where largely Black and Latino and disadvantaged young men and women that lack that counseling, that guidance, that mentorship. And we sometimes underestimate that. But a kid in an affluent society that has all that service, has a much greater advantage than a child in a disadvantaged neighborhood, economically, socially disadvantaged. So this program brings in some of the top successful, not only minority, but other mentors and business people and professionals that now take on the role of mentoring either at least one, sometimes even multiple students, where they're like their unofficial mentor and parent and advocate. And let's fill out your college application. Let's make sure we do this. Make sure we sign up for the SAT score, test and preparation course. Let's make sure we think about careers. Let me have you shadow. You like to be a doctor? Let's bring you to a doctor's office and shadow this doctor. You want to be a lawyer? I want to hook you up and have you sit in court, or have you go to a local attorney that I know and have you sit and spend time. You want to be a legislator? There's an internship in the assembly office. So go there and learn how legislation, how policy takes place. And the result is amazing. A school district like Yonkers is over 75% disadvantaged, free and reduced lunch, minority population. Over 2/3 of the population is minority, Black and Latino. And guess what? Yonkers, New York has one of the highest urban graduation rates, not only the state, probably the nation. Over 90%, even higher than local affluent Westchester communities. Yonkers has a 90% graduation rate. So when you look at what is that attributed to, what we're talking about. And I'd like to hope that I had a little role in that, in my capacity to promote transparency, after school programs. In fact, at my school for many years, not only after school program, I had Saturday Academy. Imagine kids coming Saturday, but we provided fun activities with learning, snacks. We did a lot of cultural, civic events. We had morning instruction, right? So a kid can come earlier than the 8:25 in the morning start and have maybe half an hour of math instruction or other fields.
Right.
And that's making up the difference. So for urban kids that don't have the resources to go to, tutors and go, and their parents buy them expensive books and equipment to help them and monitor and coach them, we need to provide that for our children. And
because they still need children still need that one-on-one from a teacher. And that's not something that a computer or a laptop could always provide, because you need that one-on-one. That's what helps the student learn, because not every student learns at the same pace.
Well, speaking about technology, we learned the last couple of years with the pandemic, COVID-19, where we had to close in-class instruction and kids now have to be taught online. How many of these kids had the proper technology? How many of them knew about the technology? What about parents? Too often we ignore the role parents play. That's why for many years I promoted adult education, so that the parents of the children we deal with are told and encouraged, come to after school. We have the busiest after school with morning adult education, afternoon, evening education. So even if you're a minority or an immigrant parent who works, we're saying to you, you should learn English. Not that you should learn your language at home, because I'm a big advocate of global multilingualism. Here in America, we're lucky. We think we're lucky if we learn English well enough. But then you look at the rest of the world, we've become a global society for jobs, for careers, and you realize that the kid who's coming from Latin America or Europe or the Middle East or the Far East, they're talking 2 to 3 languages.
Yes, they are.
Now with international corporations all over the place, Are they going to hire the foreign child who speaks 2-3 languages, mind you, English fluent also, or the American graduate who speaks English? That's what's happening.
Nader, I grew up in a multilingual family. My grandparents are from Turkey and Greece with
Yeah,
Spanish background, and they spoke between them 7 languages.
7-9. Wow.
7 languages,
Well,
fluent.
the average was 3 languages. You go to Lebanon, you go to Jordan, you go to, Spain, you go to different areas of the world. It's amazing how, it's like a norm that they're bi and trilingual, and I'm amazed when somebody tells me I speak 3 languages or more. Your mouth opens like, wow, that is amazing. And there's no better time to do it than at the lower grade level.
Yes, because when they're younger, it's almost like I called my son SpongeBob because my son was spoke 2 languages because I sent him to parochial school. So it was English and Hebrew, and I was teaching him that at home as well. And I grew up with Spanish, French, English, Hebrew, and my grandparents spoke Greek and Turkish and a couple of other languages. And they fluently, they could switch to one to the other. And it was funny because they would always speak in another language that they knew we didn't understand, so they could talk, like grown-up stuff, so that we didn't have to understand what was going on.
Well, I'll tell you, it's like I said, as a principal, some of the best recommendations that I've had that not only allowed me to set procedure for the school itself, and you're talking about schools 600 to 800 kids and more, where sometimes a child would say, Dr. Sayegh, why can't we do this way or that way? Or sometimes a parent may come and say at a PTA meeting, maybe we should line up the kids a little different or set up the bell schedule a different way so kids are not crowded in the hallway. So, that makes a lot of sense. So you sit down, you modify, change takes place. And some of those, what I call best practices in a school, I took them with me as a president of a board of ed and said, you know what? At a school I was at, we did XYZ that really was extremely effective and beneficial. Let's make sure we do it district-wide. We had professional development where we had administrators educate each other. So if an educator had an excellent program in his or her school, well, let's do professional development, and we don't need an outside consultant. We have Mr. Jones, who initiated a tremendous safety security program in his high school. Tell us about how you did it.
Right.
Or this individual at a middle school, increased test scores by doing ABC and had, for example, a student of the month program where, each month on the main bulletin board in the hallway, each class nominated a boy and a girl from that class to be student of the month. Their pictures were up, the PTA got involved, you had a breakfast, you gave them a nice medal, like something like this,
right.
Student of the month, and you give them a certificate and you invite the local media to film it. You can't believe the desire within every class who wants
competition.
Competition. Sure. Right? And then, somebody said to me, one kid said to me, yeah, but Dr. Sayegh, I was November student of the month. So, I had it already. So my teacher's not going to pick me again. So why should I work hard now? I said, you're right. So we initiated an end of the year event where only students of the month in good standing, right? In good standing celebrate. I mean, you're talking about rides and food and barbecue. We had local businesses and PTA, and you had clowns and you had magicians, and it was really a fun with a band, a DJ, and music. But you're only invited if you're in good standing, right? So so that addressed that. So that's what I call about always fine tuning if need be. I'm not saying change for the sake of change, but we should always be proactive where, feel free, no matter how good an initiative is, to modify it and fine tune it if you can make it better. Gun violence, what we opened the show, is a crucial area. It needs a lot of modification. It needs a lot of balancing where you want people to protect themselves, but you want to initiate so many safeguards that stop guns from coming into our community, gets illegal guns off the street, monitors who's applying for licensing, who potentially may be dangerous, who's inciting violence and threatening people. Now it's a crime. It's not just, well, he just said this. Now you can be criminally liable if you blurt out that I'm going to kill those SOBs out there, or I hate these individuals for who they are, or their preference, or their ethnicity or race. You can be held liable for that.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. And also, I just want to tell everyone real quick, you are running for re-election of New York State Assembly in the 90th District. Is that correct?
That's correct. I represent the 90th, really, as the city of Yonkers. As I said, the third largest city in New York State. And I was elected in 2018. And I went to Albany as an educator to fight for equitable educational funding. Because I really believe, in urban schools, there's a tremendous need to address English language learners, special ed students, individuals and students that need that extra support. So I went up to Albany, and I've been fighting for that. Funding has been increased. We've been legislating. We've been putting together, bless you, we've been putting together, strategies that really address our concerns. I'm proud of what I've accomplished for Yonkers. I got reelected in 2020 by one of the largest margins because, we're constituent oriented. We have an assembly office in Yonkers with the staff. We have an office in Albany when we deal with legislation and policy and procedures. And I got to say, this year I'm facing a re-election. It's every 2 years from my seat as an assemblyman. And I'm proud to say, whether it's labor organizations, nurse unions, Teamsters, AFL-CIO, Nursing Association, we're gathering the support of all the major groups. And a lot of it is based upon your credibility as an individual. You can't go to office and tell people, well, trust me again and vote for me, unless you can say, well, you know what, you elected me, this is what I've done, and this is what I intend to continue to do. So I appreciate you bringing this out, and anybody that lives in Yonkers, New York, I would appreciate the support, and looking forward to continue to do what I do best, and that is to advocate, to lobby, to use my community role, my educational role for many years, my role as an attorney to study the legalities of legislation, how to put that together, and more important, as a negotiator. My legal training and background taught me to negotiate, and I do that, whether we negotiate labor-related issues or funding-related or support service. I want to know every opinion. I want to know what this person feels and that person feels, and then look at what makes sense, and look at common sense, and look at what's doable and what's achievable.
Well, I'm going to do whatever I can on my end to help you with your reelection.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all you do, because it's shows like yours that I hope continue to focus on different issues, that impact us as a community, and to really have the opportunity to exchange ideas and recommendations. And maybe, for anyone who's interested, to give you my email and my number, I'll be more than glad to have individuals listening contact me, contact my assembly office, and say, we have a new recommendation, we have advice, we have an opinion on whether there's tons of issues out there. And people like to tell their legislators, hey, I think you should vote this way or that way, and that's why I think. And I rely on that because, sometimes I may have strong opinions on an issue, but I want to hear what other people feel. And I want to make sure at the end of the day, I'd like to make sure that my voting record reflects the best interests of the people I represent And the majority, there's always going to be someone that tells you, oh, I don't believe in what you've done. But if I know that 80% or 90 or more say, you know what, we agree with the position you took on gun legislation, and we understand why you took it, and we want you to support that. To me, I'm good with that.
Just give us the email real quick, because before we have to sign out.
Sure. First of all, email is Sayegh, my last name, Sayeghn. My first name is Nader. So Sayegh at nyassembly.gov. And the telephone number for the office is 914-779-8805. 914-779-8805. So to the listening audience, speak up. If you have an opinion, let us know. If you have a recommendation, let us know. And our job is to represent your best interests. And Pam, thank you very much for your show.
Thank you
for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And everybody who tuned in tonight, watching and listening, thank you so much. And see us next week with another new topic that we'll announce next week. Take care, Nader. Take care. Thank you, Anthony. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.